a lot about it, that world out there. In fact, for better or worse, we've created most of it. We've made tools and we've manipulated nature to change our surroundings here on Earth and even off of it. But what a curious creature man is. For what he's learned down through the ages has concerned things other than himself. Oh yes, of course, we have learned a good deal about the human, how it works. We've learned to diagnose most ailments, how to treat them. And yet, when we get up here, in this area, it gets a bit more difficult. And yet, the mind is the very thing that makes man unique. It accounts for all that is out there. And of course, what goes on in here, in this very private place that each of us has, determines how we function out there in the everyday world. But it's difficult to learn how the mind functions because what goes on in here is so abstract. When a malfunction occurs, it's harder to diagnose. After all, you can't x-ray an emotional crisis or take the pulse of a bruised ego. However, one way or another, most of us recognize one thing up here isn't working quite right, and we express it in everyday conversation. For instance, when we're telling about a particular experience we've had.
So here I had been rehearsing the presentation for 2 days, but when they called on me, I absolutely went blank.
I got the snacks down, everything's fine. Then I see this chick, man. I see this chick, and I just flipped out.
I've always gotten along before, and I still don't know exactly why, but I absolutely blew my top.
I had 14 people coming to dinner, and the cook tells me she's leaving. Well, I came unglued.
We say, this drives us wild, or this breaks us up. We say one guy has a good head on his shoulders, and the next, he's out of his gourd. We've developed a pretty spectacular way of talking about our mental state, and I suppose that's as good a way as any of expressing our tensions, frustrations, anxieties, our moments of fear, of happiness, well-being. After all, you can imagine the problems we might have communicating our emotions if we all use textbook jargon.
When I initially encountered you, I suffered a temporary catatonic reaction, triggered perhaps by fear of rejection syndrome. But now that we're relating, I'm undergoing an emotional catharsis. I feel a compulsion to establish a direct one-to-one feedback relationship.
I do not share the interpersonal psychodynamics of your fantasy, so knock off this irrational behavior.
What's rational and what isn't rational is sometimes simply a matter of viewpoint. None of us has all the traits of rational thinking and behavior all of the time. There are many different degrees of mental health, just as there are physical health. For instance, do you ever have days when you feel like this? Or like this? And at other times, we become more like... Certainly sometimes we feel like this. And on other occasions, quite the opposite. Of course, we all have this in common. Every one of us is, after all, only human. But when we get over those passing feelings, we can laugh at them, because we've all had them. And part of being human is having our own idiosyncrasies, our own viewpoints, our own differences. That's part of what makes us unique.
No!
And just because the next fellow is different, that doesn't make him abnormal or irrational.
Oh, my, it's crazy!
For example, what is considered normal in one segment of our society may seem quite peculiar in another. The way one person reacts to something isn't necessarily the way another person does. These differences enrich our world. By accepting them, we can enrich our lives.
Why don't we get a few pictures in this ballgame? My grandmother could hit that guy, you know?
Even in our
I mean, she could hit
individual
that
experience,
guy.
we find these contrasts. What may be acceptable behavior in one situation may not be appropriate in another situation. Of course, most of us, most of the time, can agree on what is appropriate and normal, what is real. All we have to do is use our heads, right? All right, let's try using our heads on this. Which rectangle is smaller? The one on the bottom sure seems smaller, doesn't it? Let's see. Now, just as an optical illusion can trick our eye and cause us to misjudge reality, tension and anxiety can distort our perception.
And the senator predicted bipartisan support for the initiative. On the local scene, police are still searching for the so-called doorbell gunman, the mysterious armed intruder who has terrorized 5 young women in as many weeks. In his latest attack, the gunman followed his pattern of ringing the doorbell of a midtown apartment and forcing...
Johnson, Lon sent me over to buy her a cup of sugar.
Anxiety or tension can be useful too, somewhat like hunger and thirst. Not only are they natural, they're necessary to human survival. These are reactions which help us protect ourselves when we're confronted by a dangerous situation. Without them, we might not be able to react effectively in an emergency. Sometimes we voluntarily put ourselves in situations where we'll feel tense and anxious. Like when we go to a sports event, or watch adventure films, or read murder mysteries. We call it getting a thrill. And it's both a stimulating source of pleasure and a mentally healthy way of blowing off steam from other tensions that may have been building up in our lives. It's the tensions and anxieties we haven't chosen for ourselves, the ones that aren't pleasurable, that bug us the most. And we all have them, whether we're aware of it or not. Sometimes we think of this as being unique to our times. We've even given our contemporary scene a name, the age of anxiety. But every age has had its own stresses and worries to cope with. Our ancestors had plenty of reason for tensions of their own. From the threat of attack by saber-toothed tiger, to the threats of flood and drought and famine. From the imagined dangers of witchcraft, evil curses, black magic, to the very real hazards of plague, pestilence, and slavery. So being concerned with ourselves in the times in which we live is nothing new, nothing unusual. The difference is, today, life is more complex. Conflicting demands are made on us. Change is so rapid that an answer that seems right one day may be wrong the next. Traditional codes of do's and don'ts are constantly being challenged. We're surrounded by threats to our safety, our well-being, our happiness. We're all confronted by these threats to our peace of mind. To be alive is to be subject to stress. So we all have anxieties and tension. At certain times in the course of our lives, it's normal to be a little more sensitive, uptight, like when we're undergoing major changes in our life, stages such as adolescence, menopause, or when we make a big change in our style of living, perhaps marriage, birth of a child, or when we lose someone we're close to. Sometimes, too, for very personal reasons, we have strong reactions. Reactions that might make very little sense to another person. For instance, if as a small child, a very small child, you'd been separated from your parents in the park, for the rest of your life you might feel very real panic anytime you were alone in a large open space. And you might not even know the reason why you feel that way. Just as the next guy might not know why he has some particular fear. For instance, an exaggerated fear of heights.
George, now you know you shouldn't be up there with that broken arm. You aren't in any shape to try something like that. Larry, climb up and paint that ceiling for George.
You know I'm afraid of heights. I get dizzy.
That's ridiculous. Now you just get right up there.
Look, I can't help it. Being on a ladder bothers me.
That's the nuttiest excuse I've ever heard of. There's nothing wrong with you except you're lazy. You know that?
When we can make allowances for the other guy's problems of attitude and behavior, as easily as we can for physical problems, we take an important step toward our own mental well-being. Of course, there are times when we all get worn out, edgy, perhaps from a siege of trouble, exhausting work. We can't seem to reason things out, or we get frustrated. We get caught in an impasse, a conflict. We can't seem to find a solution. When these things happen, sometimes we can't control our feelings, even lose control of our actions. It's quite normal to have these bouts of anxiety and tension. And while they may be unpleasant and even painful, they're not cause for concern so long as we can bounce back from them. As long as we can successfully adapt, we can continue to learn and grow. But some of us sometimes can't seem to bounce back, can't seem to recover our balance. We find that our lives have become an entire series of crises. Instead of occasional passing emotional upsets, we have prolonged periods of intense anxiety and tension or depression. We can get so caught up in these troubles that they can cause even more worries, and it becomes a vicious circle. We can find that we're constantly down in the dumps for no apparent reason, getting terribly concerned over insignificant trifles, becoming belligerent, moody, suspicious, mistrustful, or escaping into daydreams and fantasies, or feeling guilty or worthless or unwanted. These are only a few of the symptoms that tell us that our problems may no longer be just an upset or a disturbance, but an actual illness. Just as there are many different symptoms, there may be many different reasons. Even scientists who specialize in the human mind aren't sure of the cause of some forms of mental illness. But whatever the cause, whatever form the illness takes, telling a mentally ill person to snap out of it without some professional help is the same as expecting someone with appendicitis to forget about it. When emotional upsets become frequent and persist and shake someone severely, when they start interfering with his ability to deal with his family or his job or with other people, it's time to get help. If a physical problem is left alone, it may get worse. The same thing is true for other problems, too.
Oh, I've still got this pain in my side, you know. Had it about a month now. Last couple of weeks, I've hardly been able to hold down anything. I bet I haven't had a good night's sleep in 10 days.
I'm telling you, Frank, you ought to see a doctor and find out what goes on there.
Yeah, I guess maybe you're right. Hey, how about you? Things looking up a little?
Don't ask, boy. The kids, the wife, the in-laws, the boss, even the janitor's got it in for me around here. I can't sleep nights. I can't eat. I can't even keep my mind on my job. I'm cranky, you know? I'm depressed all the time. I know, it's like I'm on a downhill slide the last couple of months. Everything cracking up around me. The worst part is I don't know when it's going to stop.
I'm telling you, you ought to see about getting some help. Find out what's going on.
Yeah, I guess you're right.
You might think that needing help with such problems sets a person apart, makes him very different from everyone else. Not so. In fact, 1 out of every 4 people will find this out from very personal experience, because 1 out of 4 has someone in his immediate family who at some time will have a disturbance serious enough to require professional attention. Once a person starts getting that help, it isn't long before the problems start clearing up. And the person who seeks help has already taken an important step toward his own personal growth.
I think I might have been mentally ill or emotionally ill before that, but I think the divorce precipitated the action of getting help.
I guess about 1.5 years ago, I just completely went into solitude. Like I just wasn't paying attention to anybody. I went from school to my job and home, and
the thing in itself caused the fear of being treated by a doctor, because I felt that I was getting messages from outer space, or maybe secret messages that nobody should know, and I didn't want anybody to be asking me questions about it.
My firstborn son was 2 years old, and we realized that he was hyperactive and wasn't responding and reacting the way other children his age were.
Well, I was forgetting everything that I learned in school. And all I was doing was just, you know, messing around.
I quit the job and went home and locked all the doors and pulled all the drapes and took a bottle and started to drink and got depressed, or got depressed and started to drink, I really don't know which, and made a suicide attempt.
A lot of things were facing me, like bills and troubles, and a lot of people had a lot of different gripes about me, and I was upsetting the household.
My son is in a special school for emotionally disturbed children, and at the beginning we noticed it because he wouldn't talk, and whenever I'd show up on the scene, he'd start crying and screaming. And
like I said, I remember being very whiny, and I would cry easily, and I'd be just depressed all the time, just constantly depressed.
And I gradually went into a deep depression, and that was the diagnosis that the doctor made when my friend took me for help.
I don't know how I came to, realize that I wasn't happy or whatever, but I just, thought it'd be a good thing to go see a psychiatrist or something. So I looked into him, and, I found one.
I've been told, and I think it's true, that the illness that I've experienced throughout my life for 30 years has been what they call cyclical. In other words, every 3 years, it starts up. So I began to eventually learn that when I needed help, there was a place to get it.
Mark is my oldest, and I have 5 other younger children. It was very difficult for them. It was confusing for them. We started out on the basis that it was a family problem, which it was, and the only way to help Mark was to help all of us. It was a family therapy situation, all seen individually.
I thought it really would be too late, but the treatment is something that it's really helping me out quite a bit.
I was determined not to face reality, and thought that as long as I didn't have to think about anything and had my friend the bottle with me, it worked out pretty well for a while. But then it led to very serious things. After the suicide attempt is when I knew right then and there that I needed help desperately. And then it was recommended to me, and I accepted it, daycare.
I didn't know at the time that the hospital would be quite like it is, which has helped me quite a bit.
I do know that one of the big things that I had, and apparently a lot of the parents have in this field with emotionally disturbed kids, there's a great guilt feeling that the parent has. He feels that there's something I've done or haven't done, that this poor kid is suffering now, And therapy helps to alleviate that somewhat.
For example, when I first went to the psychiatrist, I was sort of scared of her because I sort of felt that she could see me much clearer than I could see myself.
It was a scary thing to do, but it was really worthwhile. I remember going and just not getting anywhere for so long because it's just so hard to... I think the hardest thing is to face yourself and to face what you think is so horrible, all the things you've repressed all your life.
I think I've just accepted myself better. I was raised with the thought that I was physically very ugly. And I've had to learn to say to myself, you are not terribly ugly. People would turn away if you were.
That you've never done anything like this before. I don't know, you think, I'm not nuts. What do I have to go talk to this guy for? That kind of stuff, It's okay, my kid, yeah, you take him twice a week, but leave me alone. But after a while, it became something I'd look forward to. For example, what? Somebody wants to talk to me about my troubles for an hour? They'll listen? Remarkable, you know.
No, I think that she's an asset. It's a good deal to have her. I can take advantage of, her skills, her knowledge, and what she now knows about me. And it's not a scary thing. It's a good thing.
The therapy that I'm in now, the weekly meetings, I am able to release anger that I am not able to release on my job or at home because I live alone. But just accepting myself and doing what I enjoy doing without trying to meet a pattern.
I think I've been very fortunate in the therapists that I have and the counselors that I have because they've given me like homework to do. You concentrate on one little thing at a time and overcome that. And I'm still doing homework.
I feel a lot different. I feel like I'm not as lost as I was.
And it's brought out of you slowly. They try to bring all this anxiety or whatever your trouble is out into the open with others, and they talk to you about it. They talk about your problems, they talk about their problems and everybody else's problems, and how one person is like another person. And slowly you pass that stage after a while, and you start doing your own talking.
I thought of it first, and now I see how it helped me and how it's helped Larry, that it's good to know that people can seek out that sort of thing now, that it's not a mysterious thing as it used to be in the so-called dark ages before mental illness was recognized as something not to be ashamed of or feel guilty about.
People who have known me said, how can you bear to say that you've been in a mental hospital? I said, well, same reason I tell them I was in a hospital for my appendix. I said, it's an illness and I'm not ashamed of it.
The medication that they have today, that's available today, these things are much more easily helped. And there isn't a lot to be afraid of today.
What my psychiatrist is doing now is showing me a better way, or rather helping me cope with life in general.
We're able to go on to the next goal, and we're able to cope with that together.
They can completely wrap you up into a brand new life. That's what the whole thing is based upon, is your life, people's feelings.
Well, I've regained an awful lot of self-confidence, I know. And I really think I like myself a lot better.
I like myself better than I ever did before.
I like myself better, a whole lot better.
I feel very lucky.
If you got a problem, take it to a doctor. That's the first step.
And it's not a matter of money or connections or anything else. You yourself have to realize that, yes, there is a problem, and I'm going to do something about it. To look in that mirror and say that, yeah, it's you got the problem, now what are you going to do about it,
The point is, when help is needed, help is usually available. And it makes a big difference in solving problems that might seem inside. Peace of mind, happiness, enjoyment, satisfaction. Mental health is a matter of getting it all together. It has to do with how we feel about ourselves, how we feel about other people, how we're able to meet the demands of life. Contrasting reactions, moods, viewpoints, eccentricities, quirks, tensions, anxieties, different mental states at different times, deep feelings, strong emotions. These are all part of the human condition. And so are the problems they sometimes give us. Now, it's very human to try to solve those problems by ourselves when we can. It's also very human to get help from others when we need it. And there are people who do need help in putting together the puzzle of their lives. Fortunately, there are lots of people who can help, people who are specialists in human problems, people who are trained to either give treatment when needed or suggest those who can. After all, the quest for peace of mind is universal, so there are many different doors. It's simply good sense to choose someone who has experience and training in helping people find solutions. And whatever those problems may be, you can be sure there are others who've had the same kinds of problems. So there's always someone who can lend a hand. If we have trouble finding that someone, trouble making a choice, there's always another alternative. Get in touch with the local mental health association. They can suggest people to see, tell us what resources are available in our community, mail out information to us. That's their business. Opening doors for people who need help to people who can help. And whether we get help in a personal crisis or handle it by ourselves, the experience changes us a little. When we come through it, we find we've grown. We've learned. We've become a little tougher and maybe a little bit wiser. Instead of finding crisis out there, we begin to see challenges. It's quite a world. Not always an easy one, far from a perfect one, and we all see it differently. But getting to know how we fit into it, getting to know oneself, that is the most important and exciting of all human adventures. And if we should need help getting to know ourselves, it's good to know that there are people around who can give us a hand.